Well, I want to thank everyone and say hello to many, many friends that we have here and haven't seen for quite some time, for nearly a year. I'm a little disconcerted. It's, I think, the only time we've been early in India. And so starting ahead of time, I'm not quite sure how to do that, but we'll struggle along as best we can here. So we're going to be discussing this evening a little bit from the Bhagavad Gita. This trip to India this year is a little bit different than what we have done in the past years for Devi and me, because this year we're focusing on a new institute of higher consciousness that we're working on the curriculum for. It will be located first up in New Delhi, but then it will spread out from there to basically everywhere. The real focus of that institute is on how to raise consciousness, because without the raising of consciousness, nothing else in our life is going to work much better than it is right now. Einstein said that a problem cannot be solved on the level on which that problem was created. And so whatever difficulties you're facing in your life now, whatever difficulties anyone is facing in their life, whatever difficulties the whole society are facing, are due not to some whimsical God trying to punish us, but rather because our level of consciousness creates the difficulties that we face in our life. So in this institute, the whole thrust of the institute will be based on how to raise consciousness. And it will be based on the teachings of Master, of Paramahansa Yoganandaji, and of Swami Kriyanandaji. And most especially, it will be based, kind of the root will be the Bhagavad Gita, the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, because in that great scripture is contained everything that we need for instruction. And the difference between this new institute and what we have already been doing in our Ananda centers, this one and many others throughout India, and many, many around the world, the difference between the Institute and our centers is that our centers are basically designed to welcome people who want moksha, who want to be devotees, and we help them understand that. We help them through the beginning paths of learning how to meditate, learning the guru-disciple relationship. Ultimately, hopefully, if people stay with us, to take Kriya and then to support those people with Kriya. The Institute will have a much broader audience than that. So we won't expect people who come to the Institute to start from the position of wanting moksha or wanting spiritual freedom. We'll expect them to want to have some element of higher consciousness in their lives. So at any rate, the trip for Devi Ji and me, to a certain extent, is around beginning to create the curriculum for that institute. And as I say, the core of that is going to be the Bhagavad Gita and the great teachings of that. So we've been meditating on that aspect. And what we want to do, not only for the Institute, but now I'll talk more to all of us sitting here tonight who are basically devotees and those who want to take up seriously a spiritual path. When we read or study the Bhagavad Gita, we need to understand that it's not about something that happened a long time ago to the Pandavas and the Kauravas and that there was a great war. It's all an allegory for what's going on in our own consciousness. So the field of Kurukshetra is not up near Delhi. It's not 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. It's not pertaining only to Krishna and those of the Gita. The battle of Kurukshetra is within you and within me right now at this time. And so the Bhagavad Gita is a manual for how to navigate through life. And we have to take it off of the shelf and off of the philosophy, and we have to be able to begin to look at it in a deeper way so that we can begin to understand what its teaching is for us. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, talked about virtue, and he defined virtue as that quality or a quality that makes you happy. And so we've been looking at the virtues in the Bhagavad Gita, those teachings that will help us be happy. And so I want to talk, just kind of skipping on, one could say, the mountain peaks, jumping from peak to peak, because we could talk about any one of these subjects for a good long time. And more than talking about it, we need to find ways to apply that in our life. Somebody a few years ago said something very beautiful. It was an Indian woman, and she said, I grew up with the Bhagavad Gita. I grew up reading the stanzas, chanting the stanzas, listening to pundits chant the stanzas. It was something our family did together. But she said, for me, the Gita was always like pouring milk on a murti. And she said, finally, when I read Yoganandaji's, Kriyanandaji's explanation of the Gita, for the first time, instead of pouring that milk on a murti, I was able to drink that milk. I loved that image that she had, because we have to take those truths in the Gita and begin to understand how they apply in the here and now, in the restless age with cars honking. I doubt there were many cars honking at the Battle of Kurukshetra. But there was noise, there was clamor, there was distraction. That these things are universal and they don't pertain to any single time. So coming back to what some of these virtues are. I was meditating the other day, and I asked myself the question of the kind of whole drama of the Gita starts before the Gita itself, starts with in Mahabharata. But let's start with Pandu, the King Pandu, and his sons. Now, what happens to the Pandavas, to the 5 Pandava brothers, all start with King Pandu dying. And why? It seems a little bit unfair. Here they are, princes. Here they are, ready to have this wonderful royal life, this wonderful kingdom that they're going to rule wisely and well. The people in that kingdom are going to become prosperous. And then the king dies. Seems a little unfair, as if God is setting up things against us. But let's understand what the deeper meaning is for us. Pandu is purity, and in this case, Yogananda said that he represents pure discrimination. And when we incarnate, when our pure discrimination mixes with the desires of passion or the desires of the world, our pure discrimination dies. Now, why does it have to die? Well, if it didn't die, you wouldn't need to incarnate. If your discrimination was completely developed. As Sri Yukteswar put it, if you don't need the lessons of this world, you could be adorning some higher planet. So if your discrimination is pure and doesn't need to die, then there's no drama. There's no drama of Maya. There's no spiritual path. There's no need for teachings. All of the rest of the teachings of the Mahabharata have to spring from the fact that discrimination dies. There's a joke about a young man who's somewhat green behind the ears, wet behind the ears, and a little bit foolish, and an older man who's has some wisdom. And so the younger man comes to the older man and he says, "Tell me, how did it come about that you've got such good judgment?" And the older man says, "Well, my son, good judgment is born of experience." And so the younger man says, "Well, how do you get experience?" "Bad judgment." And so the death of discrimination, bad judgment, begins to give us the experience. And through that experience, we have the gradual spiritual evolution. You know, the whole of the Gita is based upon moksha. Moksha is delusion and the cutting of delusion. So moksha and the cutting of delusion. And so if you don't have delusion, there's no need to be cutting it. So it all is based on the fact that Pandu has to die. And then what happens when he dies? Then our spiritual qualities have to go and live, not only coexist with, but live under the rule of the material qualities. And so that happens with each of us. And so we need to begin to bring that lesson home. Are your spiritual qualities right now, here, your spiritual aspirations, your desire for moksha, are they having to live within the realm that is ruled? Is your mind ruled still by the materialistic rulership? Because, you know, on the side of the Kauravas, instead of the king, Pandu, being pure discrimination, the king of the Kauravas represents the blind mind. And the blind king is the blind mind, the lack of discrimination. And so his sons are the worldly qualities, but now the pure Pandus are aspirations, and Devi's going to talk about the Pandava brothers, but they represent our chakras, and they represent the spiritual energy within. They are under the rule and under the control of the materialistic. Dhritarashtra is King Material Desire, Master called him. So our spiritual qualities, until we develop enough discrimination, are living in the court of our own consciousness. Master said over and over again that these qualities represent the citizens of our own consciousness. So we're living with the citizens under the rule of the materialistic citizens or consciousness within us. Only gradually, now for most people, they don't want to escape that. Most people, the more they can live in a pleasure palace of material desire and under that rule, the happier they think they're going to be. Temporarily, they may be happier. Ultimately, of course not. But only at a certain stage of evolution do we even begin to want moksha. And it's only then that the enlightened teacher or the guru can come in, because we have to invite him in. And so that early conflict between the the Pandava brothers growing up and the Kaurava brothers trying to kill them off. That happens within us. It's really our own battle. But only once we choose to have the guidance of a higher guru, of a higher being. That's why the scene in the Mahabharata where both Dhritarashtra and the war has been building, they both know that there has to be a fight for spirituality against materialism. So Dhritarashtra and Arjuna both rush to Krishna to enlist his aid. And Krishna sees Arjuna first and he says, well, I'll give all of my army, all of my wealth, all of my soldiers, my war elephants, all of that to one side, and I will be the charioteer only on the other side, and I won't even fight. And Arjuna is asked to choose first. And Dhritarashtra is thinking, oh, no, I've lost it. I've lost it. He's going to get all those war elephants. He's going to get everything, and I'm going to be stuck with Krishna in a chariot. And foolish Arjuna chooses Krishna. Dhritarashtra is elated. I've won. Everything is mine. All of these things, they can't possibly defeat me. But the deeper meaning is within us. If we choose, this is all about happiness and ultimately freedom. If we choose to think that we can get there through materialism, as opposed to attunement with the guide, who's our charioteer, the battle is already decided within that choice. But how many people, even in the midst of choosing a spiritual path, choose a spiritual path basically for the material goods that they can get from that. One time Swami Kriyananda went into the Jagannath temple in Puri, and one of the first Westerners ever allowed in. And he came out, he was very, very uplifted. And the priest could see that he was in an elevated state. And he came up and he said, tell me, sir, what were you praying for in there? And Swami Kriyananda said, well, enlightenment, attunement with the Guru, for the grace of God to come. And the priest said, oh, that's so wonderful, that's so wonderful. And Swami Kriyananda said, what do you mean so wonderful? Isn't that what everybody prays for? He says, oh, no, sir. Nobody prays for that. They pray for wealth or children or marriage or all material. So spirituality practiced in order to gain materialism is at least a step up from not practicing spirituality at all. But only a little baby step. You and I want to climb higher up the mountain than that. So, the choice of Arjuna to choose to align, see Krishna guiding him. So that means that Arjuna is in the chariot and he's going to go in that chariot wherever Krishna takes him. That means that you and I, if we want to win this battle, need to have the attunement of our will to the will of the Guru or the will of God, so that we allow the Guru to take us where the Guru wants to take us. We might say, oh, take me to the middle of the field, as Arjuna did, but all the rest is up to the Guru. So we might say, I want to see what's ahead of me. But then the Guru does the driving. The Guru does the guiding. And if we're wise, we are very, very happy riding in that chariot, meaning very happy attuning our will to the will of God, or in this case, to the will of Master for most of us. Without that attunement, now, Swami basically defined his spiritual path as attunement and discipleship. Without those two, we can't progress very far at all, because, as I began saying, Einstein said that the problem cannot be solved on the level at which it was created. So we think we can solve our problems, but unless we can raise our consciousness, we will simply create more of the same kind of problems. And so our job is to align our will with the will of the Guru. And the more we can do that, and we have to bring this off the shelf. We can't just pour milk on that statement. Oh yes, align our will with the will of the Guru. Oh, how beautiful. I heard him say it. I believe it. What good is that unless we practice it? And so daily in our meditation, hourly or whenever, if you run into a difficulty at work, if you run into a problem in a relationship, anything, the first thing we need to train ourselves to do is to basically attune to the Guru and ask, how shall we proceed? What should I do here? Please guide me. Please drive my chariot in the right way for this particular problem. Throughout Ananda, we always begin every meeting, just as we did tonight, we begin with the prayer. We begin with the prayer for guidance. Swami said that when you're going to talk with someone, inwardly try to pray. Inwardly try to keep your consciousness at this point. This represents the point in the chakra system where Krishna resides, where God resides. So if you can stay with your consciousness there, then your will stays attuned to the Guru. And Master said that keeping our consciousness at the point between the eyebrows is the fastest way to make spiritual progress. But it's all, again, allegorical, but it's also very practical. So choosing the Guru and staying with the Guru is the next most important things. And then, at that point, then the Gita begins. And the Gita begins with Arjuna asking to go out between the two armies, and he looks at who are the warriors on both sides. So we have to look at what conscious and subconscious tendencies we have that we're fighting against. Those are the Kauravas. So we have to look. Now, many of those Kauravas aren't standing out there saying, oh, I'm anger, and I'm jealousy, and I'm, and so we can't see them. Many of those soldiers are hidden. Many of those tendencies are hidden in our subconscious level. And sometimes we can get at them, and sometimes we can't. Sometimes we have to just keep doing our spiritual practices or working to try to unveil what those hidden enemies are in our own consciousness that are blocking us from making spiritual progress. And we also have to look at what our strengths are, what our aspirations are, and how we can help those soldiers who are fighting on the side. Remember, it's always started because we want moksha. If we don't, there's no battle of this nature going on. So it starts with that. And then Krishna is able to begin to give the teachings to Arjuna. But what he's really doing, of course, is teaching all of us. And the fact that the Bhagavad Gita took place at the very end of Dwapara Yuga, which was descending, and starting into Kali Yuga. If you look at that great circle of the yugas as being like a clock, now we have gone through the bottom part of that clock of Kali Yuga, And we're coming back up to just about the same time in history in ascending yugas as the Battle of Kurukshetra was in descending yugas. That's why the revelation of the scripture has been given to us at this time, and the reawakening of the knowledge. So, as I say, one of the purposes that David G. and I have in this trip is to begin to work on a curriculum for an institute of higher consciousness that will make these truths available to anyone, whether they want to be a disciple, a devotee, especially a devotee of this path, does not matter. Anyone who wants their lives to improve, but they recognize that their life won't improve until their consciousness improves.
Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you, and I want to take a moment to congratulate all of you for that great, successful concert on Sunday. And who ever imagined something like that could happen? And so thank you all for conceiving of it. And I know many of you were serving that day. I hope you got to hear some of it. If not, the recording will be coming out, but it really was glorious. Once in a lifetime experience, I think. And then to come to the center now, because we'll be having the art exhibit starting, well, it's already here, but the art program coming up this weekend. And I can't tell you how sweet it is for us to stand here and see these paintings, because many of them we literally took off our walls in America, and Jaya brought them over. This one right behind Dr. Amar, that has hung in our living room. The one next to Uncle Vijay, that hung in my office at our Sangha office for many years. So here we are, surrounded by old friends. And this hung in Jyotish's office for many years. And we gave them up. We said, that's all right. We've enjoyed them for a long time. So it's like all of you are welcoming us with your beautiful, warm smiles and warm hearts. And then the paintings are also there to welcome us. To focus a little bit now back on Master's commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, Jyotish picked it up. For millennia, the Gita has been the source of inspiration really throughout the world, of course, mainly in India. But it was first translated into English in just about the time of the Civil War in America. Revolutionary War, 1775. So interesting, isn't it, that the birth of America and the introduction of the Gita happened at the same time. You know, I have to add, a friend of ours, a dear friend who is from Bangalore, who now lives in America, he gave a beautiful discourse at Ananda village in America. And he started off by saying, I have an accent, and I know it's a little hard to understand, so I will try to speak slowly. And if you still have a hard time, try harder. So I will say that to you in reverse. I know to your ear, we have accents. We will try to speak slowly, but try harder to understand. So Jyotish picked up the discourse on the Gita, talking about the death of discrimination and how the 5 Pandava brothers had to fight the battle to reclaim discrimination. And it's a very interesting thread to pick it up with, Because if we think of the 5 Pandava brothers as Guruji explains it, what do they represent? Nakula, the twins, Nakula, Sahadev, Arjuna, Bhima, Yudhishthira, and he explains that each one is associated with a chakra, but also with a spiritual quality. And let's, for our discussion this evening, talk about how each of those qualities help us in the battle for discrimination, for discernment, because really one might define the entire spiritual path as finer and finer discrimination. Where and what are we discriminating? Where is God? Where is Maya? Where is unity? Where is separation? Where is the light of God? Where is the darkness of delusion? And so we need to always be discriminating. You know, in the early days of Ananda ashram in America, Swami Kriyananda was such a marvelous teacher. And I know when I came, I was very young on the path. I was 22. And there were so many times where I would say something and then around Swami, and he didn't judge us. He didn't criticize, but he would give you a look like, that isn't the right attitude. That shows lack of understanding. That shows lack of discrimination. And so I began to understand how important it was in every thought, as much as we can, in our words that we express, in the things that we do. Every moment can be an effort of alignment with discrimination. Am I expressing God in this conversation? Am I expressing God in the way I'm treating this person? And so the 5 Pandava brothers, first the twins, Nakula, Sahadev, Master said they represent the 2 base chakras, the coccyx and the sacral, thank you. And that they represent the yamas and the niyamas, the do's and the don'ts of the spiritual path. This is how we begin to develop discrimination, but it's very, one might say, fundamental level. And sometimes you hear people who have misbehaved in one way or another say, well, I'm only human. And then there's the expression, to err is to be human. Well, I don't think that attitude helps us as devotees. As devotees, we must never justify our mistakes. If we have made a mistake, and we all do, rather than to say, well, everyone makes mistakes, or that's just human nature, to say, to be self-honest. One of the niyamas is introspection. And Master emphasized the importance of introspection, to look at the mistakes we have made honestly, to discriminate. When I acted that way, did I feel closer to God, or did I feel more in my ego? And always use that as your guide. Really, Yoganandaji said, the reason most people don't advance spiritually is they lack a sense of adventuresomeness. They lack that sense of taking up the spiritual path as a grand experiment. And that's all it is. He said in America, Master said, you Westerners love experiments. Why don't you experiment with consciousness and see what happens? So to use these basic fundamental virtues, nonviolence, non-stealing, non-lying, all of these, non-sensuality, non-greed, and to say, let me discriminate so that these guide my behavior. They are not random qualities, but they are, Swami Kriyananda said, if all the spiritual teachings were lost, all the scriptures, the truths, divine truths would still exist because they are the fundamental building blocks of all creation. And so the more we can align ourselves with these, the more we can use them as tools to develop discrimination, and our discrimination can be subtler and subtler. Once we were walking with Swami in the last few years of his life, and at a certain point he stopped, and he was quiet. We were all walking quietly. He said, "Oh, that's what he meant." And we said, "Swami, what are you talking about?" And he said, "I was remembering a conversation I had with Master. This must have been 60 years in the past. And I remember he said something to another person, another fellow monk, but he was really talking to me." And so he was always, it was so beautiful to behold that level of constant, refined attunement with the Guru's consciousness. So the yama, niyama are the fundamental building blocks. Then we come to the next chakra, say lumbar. And I'm forgetting the names. And of course, this is Arjuna, Master said is represented. And he represents fiery self-control. How does self-control align itself with discrimination? Because how does having self-control help us to develop discrimination? Because, and it's a beautiful thought, really, when we know we have control over our actions, we have self-discipline, centeredness, then we become more aligned with truth. Because when that energy is under our control, the truths of our own nature become expressed more easily. We don't have to, oh, what's right, what's wrong, but self-possession, self-control, these things are the mark of someone who has discrimination. There's the beautiful story from Gandhiji's life, whose birthday we celebrated recently. By the way, someone just sent me a beautiful picture. I don't know the year of it, but it was Mahatma Gandhiji with the current Dalai Lama when he must have been about 5 years old, the Dalai Lama, just a little boy. And he looked just the same. His face was just the same. And Gandhi was just in his radiant self. But when the story that mother comes to Gandhiji and said, "My little boy is eating too much sweets. Please tell him not to eat so much sweets." And Gandhi said, "Mother, come back next week." And so she did. And Gandhiji said to the little boy, "You must not eat so much sweets." And the little boy said, "Okay, okay." But the mother said, "Why couldn't you tell him that last week?" And Gandhi said, "Last week, I myself was eating too much sweets." And so to have the control helps to give you the power to work in this world with discernment and discrimination. And then we come to the Anahat chakra, the great Bhima, vitality, pranayam. And without that, and that invigorates our consciousness. Pranayam, Kriya Yoga, all these things give us dynamic mental power. And it's with that that our thoughts and our discernment become more and more refined. But again, using the example of our beloved Swamiji, even in his old age, when his body was no longer very vital, and when we first met him, he was tremendously strong, We were telling a story today to some friends. Once a man came to visit Ananda village, and he was very proficient in the martial arts and Aikido. And he said, when I put out my arm like this, no one can move it because I'm sending that ki energy through my arm. And so some of the young men came and they tried to pull his arm down. No one could. And then Swamiji just walked right up and went, boom, pulled it right down. But it was because of the vitality born of pranayama, born of that free-flowing energy. And that helps us to discriminate. It helps us to see things clearly. It helps us if we make our mind up to do something, then we do it. And you know, again, Kriyananda, the name itself, means joy through Kriya, but also joy through action. And the spiritual man and the active man are not separate. The true spiritual man is a man of action. Maybe that action is just to meditate 15 hours a day. Maybe it's to be a big success in business. Maybe it's to do charitable work. Maybe it's to think of God all the time. Whatever it is, but the vitality of the prana, of bhima, invigorates everything that we do. And we should aim for that. Master said, try to do everything in ways that have never been done before, even little things. Swamiji said, this is very interesting to think of, Master never even tied his shoes the same way from day to day, because his mind was always open to new ways of doing things. And then finally, the throat chakra, Yudhishthira, calmness in psychological battle. That's how Master described him. So without calmness, we cannot have discernment. When our minds are restless, when they are filled with self-interest, I want this, I don't want that, how can we see what truth is? How often have I made the mistake of praying, oh, this must happen, not listening, God, what do you want to happen? And little by little, our prayers begin to change. And instead of praying for this or that or the other, we pray only for God's will to be done, because we know in that there is the highest form of discrimination. I don't want anything in my life, Lord, except what you want. And recently, someone was telling me about some things that were going to happen, and my first reaction was, well, I hope that doesn't happen. And then I quickly began writing the letters, W-Y-W. That was like my little mantra, W-Y-W, whatever you want. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to try to skew it to my desires, but just whatever you want. But calmness, it takes the power of calmness to do that. And then finally, and I'll end with this, even though he's not one of the brothers, the Pandavas, when we're moving up the chakras, as we were saying, this is the abode of Krishna, of the Guru. And in the Gita commentaries, Swami says something so beautiful. He said, we have been told that spiritual growth is 25% our effort, 25% the effort of the Guru on our behalf, and 50% grace of God. And Swami said we could think of it this way, that the Guru isn't separate from God. So either God or God through the Guru represent 75% of our spiritual progress. So we need to understand that, and with our highest discrimination, surrender as much as we can at the feet of God and His eternal channel in our lives, the Guru. And this is the path of discrimination that leads to moksha.